The show's host, Trevor Lynch, young and charismatic with a sharp smile, began with a traditional introduction. Tonight we have a living legend, a man whose voice soothes us in our darkest moments, Morgan Freeman. Trevor, casting a quick glance at his notes, added, "But is he ready for our 50 haters? Let's find out." His tone was overly theatrical, and it didn't go unnoticed by Freeman, who subtly raised an eyebrow. The first hater, a middle-aged man with a caustic grin, stood up. Cameras instantly zoomed in on him, and the studio fell silent. "Morgan," he began, savoring the moment, "is it true that your relationship with your stepdaughter was a bit too strange? Or is that just another misunderstanding?" The question hung in the air like poisonous smoke. The audience gasped, and some covered their mouths in shock. Backstage, Freeman's manager spun toward the director, whispering something furious. Freeman, however, didn't flinch. His face remained calm, but his eyes narrowed, as if sizing up an opponent before a chess move. "You're parroting gossip that's long been debunked," he replied in his iconic deep voice, each word sounding like a verdict. "My family is my private life, and I won't let you or anyone else tarnish it with filthy insinuations." His tone was measured, but it carried a steely resolve. The audience erupted in applause, but Trevor, smiling, quickly shifted attention to the next hater. The second hater, a young woman with a defiant glare, stood, holding the microphone too close to her lips. "Morgan, how many grandkids do you have? And how many of them actually see you?" The question was cloaked in innocent curiosity, but its sharp edges cut like a knife. The studio fell silent again, with only the soft hum of the spotlights overhead. The operator filming Freeman's close-up nervously swallowed, sensing the tension in the room becoming unbearable. Freeman tilted his head slightly, as if mulling over his response. "My grandkids are my joy," he said, a hint of tenderness in his voice. "I see them when I can, and they know I love them. But tell me." He suddenly fixed his gaze on the hater. "Why are you so curious about my personal life? Or do you just have nothing better to talk about?" The audience laughed, and the hater, flustered, quickly sat down. Trevor, however, didn't let the tension dissipate. "Wow, Morgan's fighting back," he exclaimed, but his eyes gleamed as if anticipating something bigger. The third hater, a man in a t-shirt with a provocative slogan, stood up, gripping the microphone like a weapon. "You're so vocal in your movies, Morgan. Why are you so quiet when black kids are dying from bullets?" The question was so sharp that even Trevor froze for a moment, and the audience gasped. Backstage, the director muttered a curse, and Freeman's publicists clutched their head. Cameras frantically switched between the hater and Freeman, capturing every micro-expression. Freeman slowly rose from his chair, a move that silenced the studio. His presence, despite his age, radiated authority. "You accuse me of silence?" His voice was low but pierced like thunder before a storm. "I've spoken out against injustice my entire life. I've supported communities, funded projects, advocated for change. But you," he pointed at the hater, "you think one question makes you a hero? Show me what you've done besides throwing words around on this show." The audience erupted in applause, but the tension didn't ease. Trevor, sensing the show was slipping out of control, quickly called for a commercial break. Backstage, chaos erupted. Freeman's manager shouted at the director, demanding an end to the provocations. "We agreed on respect," he roared. The director, throwing up his hands, mumbled something about ratings. Meanwhile, a storm was brewing on social media. Hashtags Sarsha Team Morgan and Farsakan 50V Zone were trending, and short clips of Freeman's responses were spreading like wildfire. But the worst was yet to come. After the break, the show resumed, but the atmosphere grew even more charged. Trevor, trying to defuse the situation, joked about the hot start, but his smile looked strained. The fourth hater, a man with a cold stare and a harsh voice, clearly out for blood, stood up. His name was Clint, and judging by his tone, he had a personal vendetta against Freeman. "You said you were always a gentleman," he began, his words dripping with sarcasm. "What about those women who accused you? Did they just make it all up?" The question hit like a slap. The audience froze, and cameras zoomed in on Freeman's face, catching every movement. His jaw tightened, but he responded calmly, though his voice carried barely restrained anger. "Those accusations were blown out of proportion by the media," he said. "I apologized for any discomfort I may have caused unintentionally. But I'm not the man you're trying to paint me as. And you, Clint, who are you to judge?" The audience applauded in support, but Clint didn't back down. Grabbing the microphone, he shouted his second question, ignoring protocol. "When you were accused of harassment, you called it a misunderstanding. Was that the truth, or just a good legal team?" The studio erupted in murmurs. Trevor tried to intervene, but Clint, disregarding him, hurled a third question, echoing the earlier hater. "So how many grandkids do you have? And how many actually see you?" His voice quivered with rage, his eyes burning with hatred. Freeman, who had held his composure until now, exploded. He shot to his feet, tossing the microphone onto the table, his voice thundering through the studio. "Enough!" he roared, silencing everyone. "You, Clint, think you can spit on my life, my career, my family? You stand here, hiding behind a microphone, throwing dirt. But what have you done in this world? Nothing." His words landed like a hammer, and Clint, caught off guard, stepped back, speechless. The audience was stunned, unsure whether to applaud or wait. Trevor, sensing the show teetering on the edge of disaster, tried to lighten the mood, but Freeman turned a blazing gaze on him. "This is your show, Trevor," he said quietly, but with such force that the host froze. "You let this circus go on, but I'm not your clown." The tension in the studio reached a boiling point, and cameras captured every glance, every gesture. Backstage, the director whispered into his headset, "Don't cut! This is gold." But for Freeman, this wasn't a show. It was a battle for his dignity. Okay, let's cool down a bit," Trevor exclaimed, raising his hands, but his voice trembled with uncertainty. Backstage, the director whispered to the operators through his headset, "Keep him in frame." This is a viral moment, but for Freeman, it wasn't just a moment. It was a fight for his dignity, reputation, and legacy. Clint, the hater who had thrown 3 provocative questions, stood clutching the microphone, but his confidence was crumbling. Freeman's piercing, spear-like gaze held him captive. The audience, sensing the tension, began to whisper, and some shouted words of support. "Go, Morgan!" Trevor, trying to steer the show back on track, nodded to the next hater, but Clint, ignoring the rules, shouted again. "You didn't answer, Morgan. Those women who accused you of harassment. Was it all a lie, or are your lawyers just that good?" His voice shook with anger, but it carried a desperate attempt to regain control. This time, Freeman didn't hold back. He stepped forward, a move that silenced the entire studio. His voice, deep and powerful, filled the space like thunder. "You want to talk about truth, Clint?" he began, each word a blow. "The truth is, I've lived 87 years, starring in films that inspired millions. I've fought for justice, for rights, for people you don't even know. And you? You stand here, hiding behind cheap accusations, digging up tabloid trash to feel important. You don't know what truth is." The audience erupted in applause, but Freeman raised a hand, demanding silence. He turned to Trevor, who looked as if he wished the floor would swallow him. "And you, Trevor," Freeman continued, his voice quieter but even more piercing. "You let this circus go on. You think this is entertainment? Throwing dirt at people who've built their careers over decades just so you can chase ratings?" Trevor tried to speak, but Freeman cut him off. "I came here to talk about art, about life, about how we can make this world better. But all of you," he swept his gaze over the audience of haters, "you chose dirt. And you know what? I'm not playing your game." Clint, feeling the ground slip beneath him, made a final attempt to strike. "What about your grandkids, Morgan?" he shouted, repeating the earlier question. "How many actually see you? Or are you just an old man everyone's forgotten?" That was the last straw. The audience gasped, and backstage, Freeman's manager clutched their head, muttering, "This is the end of the show." But Freeman didn't back down. He turned to Clint, his eyes flashing so fiercely that even the operators felt chills. "You want to know about my grandkids?" he said, his voice low, almost menacing. They see me. They know me. They know a man who fought for them, for their future, for a world where people are judged by their actions, not gossip. And you, Clint, what will you leave behind? A social media post? Or just the shame of standing here trying to tear me down? These words marked the start of a climactic speech. Freeman turned to the audience, his posture straightening, his voice gaining strength as if addressing not just the studio but the world. "I'm not here because I need your applause or your ratings," he said, speaking to everyone. "I'm here because I believe in dignity, in respect, in the idea that we can be better than this." He pointed at Clint, then Trevor. "You throw accusations, dig up old gossip to humiliate me. But you know what? This isn't about me. It's about you. About a society that allows shows like this to exist. About how we treat people who've given their lives to art, to struggle, to progress." He paused, and in that silence, you could hear the heartbeat of everyone in the room. "I am Morgan Freeman," he continued, his voice trembling with passion. "I've starred in dozens of films, told stories that made people laugh, cry, think. I've fought racism, injustice, and I'm still here, standing before you. And I won't let anyone, not you, Clint, not you, Trevor, not any tabloid, diminish what I've done. You want to talk about harassment? Talk about how shows like this humiliate people for clickbait. You want to talk about my family? Talk about how we, as a society, can lift each other up instead of tearing each other apart." The audience exploded in applause, some standing from their seats. Women in the front row wiped away tears, while men shouted words of support. Clint, stunned, lowered his microphone and sat down, his face flushed with shame. Trevor, sensing he was losing control, tried to joke, "Well, Morgan, you sure know how to fire up a crowd?" But his words drowned in the roar of applause. Freeman, ignoring him, turned to the audience. "I'm done," he said calmly, but with such force that the words rang like the final chord of a symphony. He removed his microphone, placed it on the table, and walked off the stage without looking back. His footsteps echoed in the silence, and cameras followed him until he disappeared backstage. The audience erupted in a standing ovation that continued for minutes after his exit. As soon as Freeman left the stage, the studio descended into chaos. The director shouted into his headset, demanding an immediate cut to commercials, but operators couldn't tear their cameras away from the rattled Trevor and humiliated Clint. Backstage, Freeman's team was already drafting a press statement, and his publicist frantically called journalists to frame the moment as a triumph of dignity. Social media erupted. Hashtags Jacharir Team Morgan, Jacharir Dignity, Over Hate, and Yaker Morgan Freeman is a Legend flooded X, with clips of Freeman's speech racking up millions of views in hours. Users wrote, "Morgan just destroyed that show with one look, and that was a masterclass in dignity." Meanwhile, Trevor and 50 vs. 1 faced a barrage of criticism. Viewers accused the format of toxicity and Trevor of enabling haters for ratings. Within days, the show's ratings plummeted by 30%, and Trevor issued a public apology, which was widely dismissed as weak and too late. Clint, whose attack on Freeman went viral, faced his own wave of backlash. Ex-users unearthed his old posts, revealing a history of offensive comments, and he soon deleted his account. His attempt to justify himself in an interview backfired when he called Freeman too sensitive, sparking even more public outrage. Meanwhile, Morgan Freeman returned to his work with renewed vigor. His walk-off became a symbol of resilience, and his speech was quoted in articles about combating toxic media culture. His charitable project supporting youth education saw a massive boost, with donations surging 200% in a week and interview requests pouring in. From major networks. In a brief press comment, Freeman said, "I hold no grudges, but I won't let anyone steal my truth." The conflict on 50 vs. 1 was a career-defining moment. Not for Freeman, but for the show, which never recovered from the blow. Morgan, as always, remained a legend, his dignity and wisdom only cementing his place in the hearts of millions.